Okay, so we've got about an hour left. I know that your pastor has a track meet to get to, and I have chips and salsa to get to at Cinco de Mayo, right? So I'm looking forward to that. So I will wrap up at noon. So we have an hour here. So I am tempted to just say any questions, and I'm sure we could fill the hour with your plethora of questions. But I want to guide this a little bit more. So we can talk about so many things that all impinge on this. And that's what's so fascinating about this. You can get into things like questions about what's the right thing to do when the church engages the state. So if a pastor goes to a city council meeting, should he go there and do a prayer? What's that look like? What about these kinds of interactions between these things? We can ask questions about just war. When is it appropriate for a nation to go to war? Or should we turn the other cheek? Does turning the other cheek apply to a nation or not? And the answer, you should already have the answer to that one is no. We're doing the law. But see, all kinds of things come into play here. It's just fascinating. That's why I like this topic. I think it's just engaging. So many things come into play, and so many things are relevant. But I do want to guide it by a few more things, and I do want to give you plenty of time to ask the questions you're interested in, and hopefully deal with the stuff you're really curious about. But I want to talk especially two more big topics. The first one is, I have mentioned this problem of this wall of separation and this kind of misunderstanding here with this. But I want to talk about the Christian side of this, and this is this problem of quietism. There are people who have thought that if we take this chart and put it into action, then what this means then is we have this nice wall, this line in between here. But in reality, this line should not be seen as a wall, but should be seen as a very permeable kind of interface between these two, so that we have the distinction without divorce and the cooperation without confusing them. So we can also get into things like political celebrations or patriotic celebrations in the church and flags in the church. Oh, there it is. And whether or not that's appropriate and whether that's a good thing or a confusing thing. And we can talk about all that kind of stuff. And I have ideas about it all. But we'll get into a few of the things that are more fundamental first. So we want to have a clear distinction, but it's a very permeable distinction. It's not a wall, but there's a give and take between them. But we have to be careful because way too many Lutherans have thought, okay, so I have my left-hand world and my right-hand ruled, and we'll just keep them apart. And that's why you start getting the idea of the separation of church and state. And this is an American idea that is actually in the Constitution of the non-establishment clause, non-interference clause. So that there is no government, state-run church, but also the government stays out of the affairs of the state. And it was Jefferson himself who advanced this idea when he wrote this letter to the Baptists in some little town out there. And I've got the letter here. I could show you, but we won't waste time with that. So Jefferson established this idea of a wall of separation. And way too many Lutherans have thought, oh, that's what we teach. We teach the doctrine of the two kingdoms, and they stay separate. Well, that's a mistake, as you're already beginning to recognize. That's not what Luther taught. We've got a pastor calling the state to task, and at the state helping the church be the church. There's a lot more cooperation going on. But there's this problem called quietism, which has happened through history. And this gets back to the World War II question in particular. Because in the run-up to World War II, you had a lot of Lutheran Christians who thought they were following Luther because they had been taught wrongly that the government is the government, you can't rebel, and the state, the church is the church, and the two should stay apart, and your job is just to be quiet and submissive and passive and support the leader. And if the leader is elected like Hitler was, your job is to be a passive supporter of this. And so quietism was the church just being quiet and letting things happen. Now, does that fit with what Luther has taught us? Not at all. Not at all. So this idea of quietism is a Lutheran heresy. This is what Robert Bennet says. He's a guy who's written a good book called The Paradoxical Vision. And if you don't want to buy my book out of spite, that's fine. You can buy his. So Robert Benet's book, The Paradoxical Vision, is a nice book. And he lays things out very well in this whole thing. And he calls quietism a Lutheran heresy. And he's right. This is a false teaching. The idea that we should just quietly, compliantly go along with the government is not what Luther taught. It's not what we should believe. If the government is doing something that violates God's will, what should we do? Challenge it. Speak up. Refuse to participate. And this is even more our responsibility in a democratic republic, because we have that authority to be able to speak. So if we see our government doing something wrong, we should say, stop it. Now, concrete example. What about the abortion thing? Is abortion okay in God's eyes? No. It's just not. And I don't care how you slice it, you're taking a human life and you're killing it. And in the worst way you can imagine. A child in utero being terminated. This is wrong. It's killing. It's a violation of the fifth commandment. Does God have a clear word on this? It does. So when the state is violating this, should the church challenge the state's violating of this? It should. Now, how the church does that, maybe it does it as a whole church body. Maybe we keep on lobbying Congress. Maybe our people learn to vote certain ways. This is what we do. And this is kind of a big deal. Because you see, killing a child in utero, an abortion, is the fifth commandment. It's not like this is what about minimum wage laws? Isn't that important? What about wetlands? What's more important, preserving a wetland or preserving a human life? For God, there's no distinction here. Human life is significant, and there's a clear commandment about this. Are we also charged to care for the environment? Of course. Absolutely. Are we charged to have justice towards people? Absolutely. So we have to be much more careful about our speaking up. So in many ways, if you're actually paying attention to what I've been teaching, listening to Luther, paying attention to this teaching, you can make the case that when it comes to our involvement in the world around us, how active should Lutherans be? Very active. And this is one of the most ridiculous realities that I cannot understand, is Lutherans have a reputation for being quiet and passive and submissive and not very involved in activism stuff. But if we actually are paying attention to what we're being taught by our Lord and by our own church's teaching, we should be quite active in the world. Because this is God's world, we care about it. We do not have an attitude of, well, it's all going to burn anyway, who cares? No, we're not dismissive. This is God's world. He cares about it, we care about it. We don't just take a hands-off approach. Neither do we have the idea that, oh, that's not my business. Of course it's your business. Neither do we have the idea that, well, I'm just a Christian, I don't have an opinion. Of course you have. You have God's law that applies. We should give a rip about what's going on out there. So we should care about things that are wrong in the world. We should be actively working against what's unjust. Now, this is interesting, though, because if we're going to let God's law be the criteria, it might lead us to some surprising conclusions. So I gave you the example of abortion. That's pretty easy. We all know that's wrong. What about immigration? What is God's attitude toward the immigrant? Does God have anything to say about that? Oh, we're not quite so quick on this one. Now, you're supposed to obey the law. So that means you don't swim across the Rio Grande and come here illegally. And that's fair enough. But if somebody shows up at your doorstep and he's needing help, what do? You help them. And does God care a lot about sovereign national borders? That's not very strong in Scripture anywhere, is it? So preserving our national integrity, is that important to God? Probably not. Showing kindness to those who are impoverished, that's pretty important to God. And in our Lutheran tradition, we're pretty good about defending abortion, but we're not so good on our, what about the impoverished? Well, that's their problem. Well, no, it's not. We have to care about this. And it surprises people to learn that Luther was a big supporter of a community chest. The idea of welfare, yeah, he thought that was part of the prince's job. If you've got like a widow and an orphan who have no recourse, should the government help them? Luther said, yeah, that's appropriate. They need to be helped, and we need to care for them, and the government can organize that. That's not inappropriate. So we have to be a little careful assuming the Christian position on social justice or on welfare and these kinds of things. And we have to be careful that we don't just start following lockstep behind one political party or another. And so there are some who would say, well, social justice, that's the Democratic cause. I'm going to become a Democrat. Well, but they have other things very wrong, like definition of marriage or the abortion thing. Then you'll say, okay, I'll be in a Republic then, because they're good on abortion, they've got the marriage thing right. Yeah, but are they really taking the scriptural Christian position on immigration? Are they really? Should we be saying, build the wall? Well, because we have to protect ourselves. Wait a minute. What is God's desire? What's really important here? Protect ourselves or showing compassion to the people around us? So maybe we should be saying, hey, who cares about America's integrity? If we have something to offer, we'll offer it. And if America gets watered down or changed, so what?
God was very
Oh, yeah, that's true. In the Old Testament, you have the kind of the pogroms where you're going to destroy all the Canaanites. That's quite right. God told Moses and Joshua that's what he wanted done. He hasn't told us that kind of stuff for a long time. Okay? So we need it. No, I'm not handpicking. I'm saying, what are we told by God to do? What we're told by God to do is uphold justice in the world. And that means giving to each person what is his due and showing that kindness to people. That's what God calls us to do. So quietism is ruled out. What is ruled in is activism. And what we have to recognize is the activism is going to look different in different places. And we might not all agree on this. If there are things that are in the core basic truth, things like the fifth commandment, okay, about no killing, that's pretty important. And things about, like, also the fifth commandment is help and protect your neighbor. And so that's pretty important. These things come into play. And we need to pay attention to these kinds of core things and figure them out. But Christians are going to have differences of opinion about how best to help the illegal immigrant and how best to stop abortion. What do we do? Do we, compromise, or do we just vote for these kinds of people, or do we not vote at all? What do we do? There are different ways of being active, but we need to be investing and caring in the world around us.
So
yes?
Just, maybe help a little bit. What's really great about being Lutheran is that we are really called as Christians to live in between extremes.
Yes.
Right? We live in tension. And there are so many paradoxical tensions that we live in between.
Yes.
And I think these social justice kinds of things are some of those.
Correct.
Right? Is it important for people to obey the laws and not come across the border? Absolutely. But don't live in that extreme, because the other extreme is also valid. Care for the neighbor in need. Well, we need to live in tension between that and not take a hard and fast line. Extremes are usually
right.
wrong.
Correct. No,
Extremes are usually wrong.
That's right.
Always. I challenge you to find an extreme that's actually correct.
Jesus is Lord.
There we go. You got one. Maybe in terms of Jesus.
No, I'm with you, but you're right.
But we live in that tension, and that's what's challenging. And too many Lutherans will take opposite extremes. Stop. Don't take those opposite extremes.
Right. No, I agree that we are called to live in this tension between, and that's where we're back to the chart again and thinking about this. What is the just thing to do? If we're going to aim at justice in the left hand, what would that look like? Justice for the unborn? Yeah. Justice for the immigrants? Yeah. What about justice for our own people? Yeah. But see, if you start thinking about priorities, what usually is not as important is feathering your own nest as it's serving the other. And this is very Christian. We talked about that last night, is denying yourself, living for the sake of the other. That's the critical way that God calls us all to live. So that means if it's good for me, it's not that important. I hinted at this before with voting. You don't vote for the candidate who's going to give you more goodies. You vote for the candidate who's going to support justice, which sometimes is going to be inconvenient for you.
Justice is abiding by the laws of the land.
Justice is not abiding by the laws of the land. It's abiding by God's truth. Yes. But where the justice is God's truth for how things work. And nations can establish laws, which if they're good laws, correct, if they're in line with God's law. But can a nation establish a law that is against God's will? It can, and it has it with abortion. Yeah. What's the law of the land in America today? It's a woman's choice. Roe v. Wade is the law of the land in America. Is that a just law? So, a law can be unjust. So just because a nation establishes law doesn't mean it's just. And we have to say, wait a minute, is this a just law or not? And you can't just, and see, that's the problem with the quietism. The government has spoken. Yeah, but the government is also fallible, and the prince needs to be held accountable by the club laid beside the dog. Is that just or not? And we have to ask the question. And so just because it's the law of the land doesn't mean it's right. So we have immigration laws. Maybe we should say as the church, are those just laws? Are they right? Is it a just law when somebody has a family torn apart because one of the parents was an illegal, they've been here for 10 years, and they were wrong to come here, no doubt about it. But is it a just law? Maybe the law should be changed. And instead of the law just saying, follow the rules, maybe we should be saying, we need to look at the rules again. See, that's what I'm getting at here. What is justice really calling us to do? And it puts us into some weird spots. that we're not used to thinking about, a little uncomfortable, because we tend to be good, compliant, follow the rules kinds of people. But we have to also ask the question is, are the rules the right rules? Are they upholding God's justice? And that's where the activism comes in. And I'm not suggesting activism as organizing a protest or a sit-in and start making our placards and going down and making our voice heard. Maybe, but maybe more actively, we're just actually doing justice in the world. And the way we vote, the way we spend our money, the way we, talk to people about things, that's maybe the kind of justice we should be doing. So that's the first thing I want to get at is Quietism is wrong. And when Quietism led to the church in Germany in World War II and in the run-up in the 30s, just basically saying Hitler's duly elected, they were wrong. And this is a black eye on the church, and everybody's embarrassed by it about it now. But at the time, most people thought, well, that's probably right. And we even have, to our embarrassment, LCMS documents written in the 30s saying, well, Hitler was duly elected, let's just kind of see where things go. And, we have to support him. Nowadays, in hindsight, well, that was easy to see. But at the time, everybody thought they were just kind of following the rules. But see, we need to be paying attention to what God is saying, which is the core truth, and that's the justice, and applying it appropriately and thinking things through. And this, again, so back to the abortion thing. A lot of Christians say, I don't want to be a litmus test kind of voter. It's not like it's just one abortion is the only issue. But guys, that's kind of a significant issue. Killing babies in utero, kind of a big deal. And it would be great if we could get that one dealt with, because then we could talk about what's better, a minimum wage law at $15 or $20 or $10, or should we stay out of that? What is really better for people? There's some room for discussion on that kind of stuff. And what's better? Changing immigration laws. Those are kind of important discussions as well. But man, there sits that abortion on demand thing. That's a big problem. And there sits those things like redefining marriage and watering things down. This is a problem. So Quietism needs to be recognized as a problem and as a sin. Now, next thing I want to talk a little bit about more, my second topic is the whole issue of the American experiment. And this, I need to do a little bit of background on, kind of lay this out for you to kind of make my case. The idea of the American experiment. And this is important in where the upshot of all this and where this is headed. So, the America comes to fruition in 1776. We all know our American history. And what's the foundation of our American experiment? A lot of people in the church, especially people on the right, kind of right-leaning Christians, a lot of us, who are, believe in God's truth and believe in these values of things, would tend to say, well, America was founded on godly principles. It's founded on biblical principles, and this idea is very popular. But if you actually look at the documents, the founding documents, if you study the Constitution, it becomes very clear. And if you read any of the founding fathers, I'm talking Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, Adams, if you read their stuff, yes, they bring in scriptural things. They'll even quote the Bible from time to time. But what's driving them is not scriptural philosophy or Lutheran theology or Roman Catholic theology or Calvinist theology. What's driving them is the thinking of the Enlightenment. All right? That's what's driving them. The American experiment is an Enlightenment experiment. And by Enlightenment, I mean the philosophical move that begins with René Descartes in about 1650. That's when René Descartes dies. And René Descartes was a philosopher who is trying to figure out what's true, what's real, what he can be sure of. And he decides the one thing he can be sure of is that he's not sure about anything. He's having this kind of a crisis of what he can be sure of, a crisis of empirical knowledge, a crisis of epistemology, what he can know. And so he comes up with the thing he knows is he doesn't know anything. So he comes up with this famous phrase, cogito, cogito ergo sum. You guys have heard that before, right? Cogito ergo sum, which means, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. Cogito, I think, therefore I am. And what Descartes is suggesting then is, what I know for sure is that I'm not sure, so I am thinking, and if I'm thinking, I exist. And so what Descartes does basically is he reestablishes the Enlightenment project with man as the beginning point. And that's what you need to take away from all this. The Enlightenment is founded on man is the center. That's what the Enlightenment is all about. Man is the center. Man is the beginning point. Man is the foundation. God still has work to do. especially early in the Enlightenment. Because where did the world come from? I don't know. God must have made it. Okay, fine. Where did morality come from? Well, God must have put it there. Okay, that's fine. And so God still has work to do. But as the Enlightenment moves along through history, God's place in it becomes smaller and smaller because man starts to figure out more and more stuff. Or starts to think he figures it out. So then when Darwin comes on the scene in the 19th century, and Darwin says, well, you know what? Everything we see around us is just a result of natural selection, and I can prove it. People said, whoa! So I guess we don't need God to create. It just kind of happened. And so God's place gets smaller yet. And so what you see happening in the Enlightenment over the 350 years of Enlightenment history is God's place just keeps on getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Until here we are now in 2018, and a lot of people are saying, we don't need God at all. And you'll have atheists just declaring, God's just made up, he gets in the way, he's a problem, we just need to get rid of him altogether, and they want to finish him off completely. And that makes people like us who believe in God say, what? You can't do that. That's wrong, that's horrible, that's terrible. And so, but that's the Enlightenment project. Now, here's what you have to recognize. The Enlightenment then was going full blast in 1776. We're just 100 years after Descartes, and it was guys like Rousseau, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes. These were the people who were influencing the Founding Fathers. They were reading John Locke like crazy. They were reading Rousseau like crazy. And Locke and Rousseau are founded on the idea of basic human rights. Basic human dignity. And see, it's all starting back here with man. Man is born free with rights, and then he gives up some of those rights. And the whole premise of the Enlightenment experiment then was, let's build a country on the Enlightenment ideas. And so Jefferson and Hamilton and Madison and Adams all got together and said, all right, let's try it. Instead of having God establishing a sovereign king who is a bad tyrant, we're going to say that no, God has given authority to the people. And all people have this authority, and it comes from God to the people. They have the authority to do what they want because God has given them that authority, and now they will determine truth. And so that's what's been established. That was what the Enlightenment did, is made the people the foundation. And so then they created a constitution, and they created documents, they created a whole form of government based on this idea with the people as the center and the foundation. That's what's going on. And so in America today, we have an entire government built on the premise of the people are the final authority. Now, early on, it was still the idea that God gave the people the authority, but as time has gone on, we've come to realize, what do you need God for? And God's place gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But the principles that were established for our country are still very much at work. And they are Enlightenment principles, that man decides what's true, man decides what's right, and we have this kind of check and balance. So in 1776, the Enlightenment was rolling along, but it hadn't pushed God out completely, so God still enters in. People are still suspicious of human nature, and so we have the American experiment kind of comes into fruition, what I would say is the sort of in the sweet spot of the Enlightenment. When God's still around and we're going to build this Constitution, so we do. But the foundation of our country is built on the Enlightenment, not on the Bible. There's some correspondence there, but they're very different. So in other words, the country that we see today around us, where we see Christian principles being pushed out, and we see people asserting their own ideas, fits perfectly in the Enlightenment. Because in the Enlightenment, the most important thing is the rights of the individual. That's the most important thing in the Enlightenment. And that's what we see going on in our own Constitution with the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. It's the whole idea. It's the rights of the people. That's the thing that matters. And it's the rights of me. That's the important thing. So in our culture today, what we see going on is, well, how do we work out the rights of the individual? Well, if an individual declares himself to be, homosexual, he has his rights. And we need to value his rights. So what we're going to do, we're going to say that he can marry whoever he wants to, and that's fair. See, that's the rights of the individual. It makes complete sense according to the Enlightenment principle. It makes complete sense. For Christians, we say, how can you do that? You're violating God's will. But the Enlightenment says, what do you mean God's will? That's never the foundation anyway. The foundation is the humans who decide. The people who decide. So in America, 51% of Americans decide what's true. That's how it works in America. It has always worked that way in America. It's just that for a couple hundred years, 51% of Americans kind of followed the Bible and thought the Bible was pretty cool and listened to that and followed that as their norm. And so there was a nice correspondence. But when 51% of Americans decide, you know what the Bible says doesn't matter to me. I think it's more important that we are just nice to everybody. And so rights are rights. If the individual has rights, yeah, give him his rights. Who should be shocked? And see, the thing that's so weird is you have people saying, we have to get back to our Christian principles. They're not there. There were no Christian principles. What we see going on in America today is the fruition of everything that was built into it at the start. The country has not moved off of a foundation. We have built on the foundation. It's just the foundation is not what we thought it was. It was always man as the center. And that's exactly what's going on today. So when Christians are trying to say, we need to save America, we need to be careful. What do you mean, save America? This is a country that God has given to us. And I'm grateful for this country. It's done many wonderful good things and has got a lot of right things about it, but it's also founded on the Enlightenment. So the idea of somehow we're trying to preserve America the way it used to be, there is no used to be. And the foundations of this country have always been suspect because they are Enlightenment foundation. So as the Christian, our attitude should be a little different. And this is why I want to give you this thought. We should not be in the business of trying to save America or return America to its roots or get America back the way they used to be. What we should be interested in is saying, I want to live according to God's justice. I want America to be a just America. And I will do what I've always done as a Christian, which is try to turn people to follow God's will, even if they don't know that's what they're doing. That's what I want to do. And I do that because that's what's right. Am I trying to restore America? I don't think there's anything to restore. Am I trying to get people to follow God's truth? Yeah, that I'm interested in. But I'm far more interested in this happening in my own home and in my own church and in the community I can influence as much as I can. America's going to go where America's going to go. And now I'll give you the very bleak story, which is the Enlightenment is still going full blast. People now call it postmodernity or postmodernism, and they say, oh, that's all done. But really, we're still just following the Enlightenment principles, and it just keeps on chugging along, going full blast. It does not matter who you put into office. It doesn't matter who is in the Supreme Court. The Enlightenment is still running the show, and it hasn't changed. And it's not going to change. And instead of us trying to figure out how we're going to fix America, let's just be really content trying to make sure that we're saving our families and making sure the church is staying faithful. To me, that's big enough of a challenge right now. And let's do what we can to try to make a difference in America whenever we can. Keep voting, keep paying attention, keep investing, but we need to realize what we can do and what we can't do. And that's where our focus needs to be. All right, now, got about 30 minutes left, so questions you have or concerns you have or things you want to ask about. And I'll toss out a few other things if you don't bring up anything else. Yes? Yeah.
What would your response be to that?
Well, the country for a long time has tried very hard to make sure that there is no federal funding for abortions as part of the whole thing, so you don't have that dilemma. But then you always have the question of, wait a minute, but my taxes are going for some things that are unjust, whatever that might be, whether it's for abortion or for an unjust war. This has always been a dilemma Christians have faced. The church has thought about this quite a bit, and usually the response is, but the government is responsible for collecting taxes. You're responsible to pay your taxes. Give to Caesar his due. And Jesus didn't negate that. And then you work for what you can to try to change things. So in other words, you can... Okay, I'll just bottom line it real quick. A Christian can pay his taxes and not feel like, oh no, I'm complicit in abortion. And he should be saying, I'll pay my taxes and I'll help the government to try to be right the best I can so it doesn't do the wrong things, and I'll keep on working for that. But I also have to pay my taxes because it's going for all kinds of things that do need to happen, like roads and, helping those who are impoverished, whatever. So there's doing all these things that are right, and for the part that's wrong, I will make my voice heard and try to do what I can to change that, but I still need to pay my taxes. If, however, you're a Christian who becomes so troubled by this that you just can't pay your taxes, then don't. Don't violate your conscience. But then be prepared to go to jail for that too. And that's just part of it. You pay the price for your civil disobedience. If you're believing that God tells me I can't do this, then don't. But then you pay the price. Don't expect a free pass because you're doing it out of conscience sake. They could care less what your conscience tells you. They just want to know if you're obeying or not. And if you're going to disobey for conscience sake, great, go for it. But pay the price as well. That's what civil disobedience means. All right.
Also related to quietism, what do you do if you're not sure what the right course of action is?
If you're not sure what the right course of action is, that's why you have the church. And you go to the church and you talk to the church and you help say, what's going on here? What should we think? How should we think about this? And that's why the pastors and other Christians help you sort it out, help you think it through. And if the church is still confused, maybe the church needs to talk more and think about it. And if it's really that muddled, which it sometimes gets gray and muddled in there, then you basically say is you pray, you make a decision, and you move forward. If it turns out to be the wrong one, then you repent and claim God's grace and move forward again. And so that's the kind of confidence we live with. But if you're not sure, you seek input to be able to sort it out. So like an example, a guy gets a draft notice and he's not sure if the war is just. What should he do? Well, he needs to get good counsel and sort this thing out and figure out, can I obey the draft notice and go support this war? Well, maybe he can. And he can pick up arms because he's supporting the left-hand work, and that's appropriate. Or maybe he realizes this war is unjust. There's lots of evidence for that. I don't want anything to do with it. And the church could come up with supporting both positions. Depends on how he sorts it out. All right.
On the position of immigration, erasing the borders, or the social justice,
Yeah.
is it truly helping other people, or is it starting a snowball of enablement?
What do you mean by enablement? How, in what sense are you enabling?
Well, when you, for example, in immigration, when you allow people just to willy-nilly come across the borders, I think we're helping them. Are you encouraging others to just continue to...
Oh, you might be, because but see, this kind of the question is, what do you mean by hurt? What do you mean by help? What does it mean to care for the neighbor? We need to sort that out too. And it's not like just open the borders, wide open borders. Although you can make a pretty good scriptural case for this. God's pretty clear. You care for the sojourner and the foreign among you, and this is very clear. On the other hand, we also need to think about, wait a minute though, if we're letting just anybody come across here, we're threatening the life of our own people, because we could have, bad people coming in here. So I think there's not a problem with having some kind of regulations. I'm not saying get rid of all the rules. I'm saying maybe we need to rethink some of the rules that are there and some of how things are operating in the process. If you've ever actually tried to help somebody, apply to do it by the rules, it's not as simple as it sounds. I mean, this is exceedingly complicated and really difficult. So maybe we should streamline that. So I'm just saying, you're right, these get complicated. And the further you get into actual policy, the more complicated it gets, and the more room there is for people to disagree on what we should do. On core things, it's pretty easy. Don't take life. All right. What about we want to encourage justice? What's fair? Okay. So what's fair? Is it a $20 minimum wage? Is that fair, or does that actually hurt people? And you can make arguments both ways. It's not like there's a slam dunk Christian answer to this, even any more than for immigration. The Christian answer is get rid of all the rules. The Christian answer is enforce all the rules. No, as your pastor said, the right position is probably far more nuanced, sorting these things out. And what we need to do is practice a lot more patience with each other and understanding of, you mean you can be a Christian following Jesus and think that, and I think this? And the answer is, yeah, you can both be thinking very different things, but both be trying to follow Christ. And we need to have a little more patience with each other and a little room for some latitude there, instead of being so narrow in our thinking.
So maybe, to kind of clarify, maybe illegal immigration is wrong. They're supposed to follow the rule of the law to come to this country legally.
Yes. No, I'd agree. But then maybe the rules should be changed so that they can come in the country legally a little more easily, without tearing apart families, or without hurting them, or without depriving them of things that are fair. So maybe we need to make it easier. So that's what I'm saying. I agree, follow the rules, but maybe the rules are wrong. And then the church should be saying, let's work actively to change this instead of trying to tighten them up and toughen them up, which you hear a lot of Christians talking that way, and I find that a little odd, frankly. Okay? Why should Christians want tougher immigration rules? I'm not sure that that's a Christian position. Follow the rules that are there? Yeah, I'm fine with that, but maybe the rules need to be rethought. All right. Yes?
In the beginning, when you taught us about 1 through 5, the Lutherans and the Evangelicals, I'm struggling with
Yes.
the 2 and the 3.
Yes.
That you're telling us, in one sense, go out and vote, be active, but
Yes.
you're also saying
Correct.
Confused about the
Great. I can clarify that one for you. So the difference between category 2 and 3 at the beginning here. So 3 is trying to transform the culture. 2 is keeping them in tension. And the difference is this. The goal of the evangelical ultimately is a Christian America, where we want to have the 10 Commandments basically being the law of the land. And we want to have, the gospel being preached. So for them, it would be awesome if we would have the president standing up and giving a gospel presentation. That's what they're looking for. I have no interest in that at all. I don't want the president preaching the gospel to me or delivering the means of grace. That's not his job. So that's the difference.
Don't you want him keeping the 10?
I want him keeping the 10 Commandments. I want him upholding justice. But see, a Muslim can do that too.
So you want the law part kept, but not.
That's exactly right. I don't want the government trying to do the church's business of upholding the gospel and preaching Christ to the nations. That's not the government's job.
But isn't the evangelical church one of the fastest growing churches in our country, possibly because of that?
I don't know. It depends on who you're talking about, how you're defining evangelical. Some of them are doing great, some not so much. It varies widely. And I'm not sure what motivates or what causes that. I'm just saying that if we're going to be consistent with the scriptural teaching, our goal is not to try to, an America, Christian America. It's Americans who are Christian, yeah, and an America that's just. That's what I'm interested in. And the confusion comes, I guess, in just kind of eliding them. And let me clarify more of the problem. See, the problem starts coming if we start thinking that my Christian faith and my American patriotism are all one thing together. God, guts, and guns made America great. Mom and America, pie and Jesus, this is what it's all about. It's really confusing because then we start to think that as America goes, so goes my faith. And so if America starts, doing something wrong, wait a minute, I get confused about this. Or, suppose that America would collapse next year and no longer exist. Is my faith gone? And you say, what's going on here? And what happens if we start running these things together? So then that means if you're not American, you're not really a Christian. You have to become an American. What's going on here? Is Jesus America's God? It gets really confusing. And so we have to keep this straight. This is part of the problem with even the patriotism in church. So it's great. We all stand up and sing, God bless America, or America the Beautiful. Well, what happens if you have an Italian who happens to be visiting your congregation and you're all doing your American Jesus stuff, your American patriotism stuff in the divine service? They thought they came to get the gospel. But what are they getting? A little patriotic rah-rah. Does that really belong? You see, that's the confusing part, which is why I'm not a big fan of the T-shirts with a cross with an American flag emblazoned across it. To me, that's hugely confusing. It's a mess because it's like Jesus in America. Jesus was an American dying on the cross. What? It's just weird. And we don't think it's weird because we're so used to it, but we shouldn't be used to it. We should say that's weird. Imagine seeing, a German with his, German. Well, we had this in the run up to the Third Reich. You had swastikas on crosses. The Deutsch Christian actually had their symbol was cross with swastikas. And we think that's an abomination. Well, what's so different about that as putting an American flag on it? Just because we don't like what the Nazis did, but it's the same thing. It's the confusion of the two things together. Yeah.
It seems because we're voting for sinful candidates that when we try to find God's will here, you couldn't vote for anybody.
Well, that's a great point. So how do you vote as a Christian? And that's a great point. I'll speak to that. Because you see, so what should a Christian look for in a candidate? Are you looking for Christian candidates? Not necessarily. I'm looking for just ones. And does their character matter? Yeah, it matters because character comes into how they vote and how they think and how they operate. So I do care about character. But Luther said, I would much rather be ruled by a just Turk than a foolish Christian. And his point is that the individual faith of the ruler isn't that important as is he going to be doing the right thing. So then Christians can sort this out. You can decide, well, I can't vote for this person or that person because they're both lousy character or they're both unjust, so I'll vote for this third-party candidate. Fine, you can do that. Or you might say, if I vote for a third-party candidate, given the system of our country, I'm basically throwing away my vote, so instead I'm going to vote for one of the two, and I'll hold my nose and vote, and I'll ask God to forgive me on the way out, and God will forgive me, and I'll do what I need to do. And so you vote for the lesser of two evils. You can do that too. It's kind of your call on how you're going to do it. But what you can't do is not vote. Because by not voting, you're shirking your responsibility, and that's not an option. You got to go vote.
There's concern, when we look at in God we trust, we are brought up believing that is a Christian God.
Yeah.
But it's really not.
Right.
And that just
Okay?
You have somebody that's elected to office, put in that position by God, that is not Christian.
Right.
Where does that one go?
All right. So you're bringing up a really difficult wrinkle in all this, but it needs to be thought about. And so we got In God We Trust on Money, and then we go to the baseball stadium. You guys can go to Kauffman. I'll go to Busch Stadium. Thank you. And you stand up you stand up before the game. You sing "God Bless America." So who are you singing to? God bless America. It's kind of a prayer. God bless America. Who are you singing to? Well, I know who I'm talking to. I'm talking to Triune God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But what about the guy next to me, who's a Jehovah's Witness? And the guy next to him who's a Muslim, checking this whole thing out. And the guy who's down the road he's an atheist. He doesn't care about this, but he'll still sing God Bless America because it makes him feel good. And he likes it. So who are we all singing to? Which God? See, this gets really confusing. And the reality is, when we talk about God Bless America or even in God We Trust, you can make the case that this is really just the civil God. And this is just the kind of the American God that's out there that kind of holds you accountable, that puts you here and gives you things to do. And this gets into moralistic therapeutic deism. That's a whole other 8 hours of teaching, and that'll be my next seminar. What's that?
America becomes God to that.
Well, yes, you have the America itself becomes God, or the civil God is just the God who made America great, keeps us safe, helps us fight our wars, and blesses us, and then lets us do whatever we want. He's cool. And that's kind of the civil God. The civil God has a role to play, especially as that God, like in God We Trust and God Bless America, holds us accountable. So in other words, there's a place even in the left hand for the civil God to remind people that you're accountable to a divine being. You better shape up. That God has a role to play, and I'm not opposed to that. But we have to realize it's not the Christian God. And if you're going to be a strict first commandment kind of guy, you say, well, that's an idol. And yeah, it fits the definition of an idol, and we have to be really careful here. So, but does that mean you should sit down during the seventh inning stretch? That's your call. You have to sort this stuff out. For me, I'll still sing God Bless America because I think it's good for America to have a civil God and to be held accountable to that God. And this is the argument Richard John Newhouse makes in his book, The Naked Public Square. But now we're getting into very nuanced, difficult kind of stuff down the line. But there's a place for that. It's just that we have to realize it's not really the full blast God that we think he is. He's probably not Jesus we're singing to. But it's a God that's doing the job that the left hand needs, which is to keep it in check a little bit. And I'll take that. It's enough for the left hand. Is it enough to save you? No. But it's enough to keep you in check.
So the law foundation, the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
How is that to be treated then in government? Because our laws
Yes.
on that, and that's certainly
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so, so where do the Ten Commandments fit? So do I want the Ten Commandments posted on courthouse walls? I'll take it, because that's the natural law. Do I want Christian crosses posted on courthouse walls? No. Nope. Because see, that's proclaiming Christ. That's the church's job. But I want them upholding the law. So there's a difference here. So I'll take the law being upheld anywhere I can and getting that pushed forward. See, I'll even be content if we get people following basic laws of Taoism or whatever else, is treating people fairly and stuff. Because that's all part of that natural law stuff. C.S. Lewis gets into this in Abolition of Man. And so this is the idea that I want God's law upheld, and I'll support that. But I don't want the government doing the proclamation of the gospel thing. I'll draw differences there. So do I want public schools having prayer, starting the day with prayer? No. Do I want public schools having the Ten Commandments posted? Sure, I'll take it. But if they tear it out, I'm not going to get all bent out of shape either. Because what do I expect? It's Enlightenment culture. Of course they're going to do that. Okay? Pastor.
Well, you stole the prayer in school, right?
Yeah.
Lutherans a lot of times are very surprised. We don't care about prayer in school.
Right.
Don't care. Flags in churches.
Well, there is one. Yeah. Well, I'll come back to flags and churches in a minute. I want to say a little bit more about the prayer in school. We don't care, and even more than we don't care, we might even say we're opposed to it, because the prayers that you're going to get in the public schools are going to be so weirdly generic that I don't want my kids hearing it anyway. That's right. And so we're better off not doing it. And so I'm just not supportive of it at all. I have no interest in that. But I am interested in God's law being established any way I can. Flags and sanctuaries. Well, see, if you're going to follow this thing through, it starts to look like confusion to me. And the reality is, American flags only started to appear in sanctuaries in Lutheran churches in the First World War, because people were very suspicious that the German Americans really weren't very good Americans. And after all, they still preached in German, which they did. In LCMS churches, they still did all business in German up till the First World War. And that kind of did us in. It's like, okay, the Deutsch is kind of a problem. It doesn't look real good. And so we moved to English, and a lot of churches started saying, hey, we're good Americans too, so we're going to prove it. So they started putting flags in the parish hall, which would have been in the fellowship hall, or into the out in the narthex. Well, then they started somehow showing up in sanctuaries too, and they worked their way into sanctuaries. And by the time you get to the Second World War, it's even more, hey, we're good Americans. And that's when they showed up. But before the First World War, there were no flags in sanctuaries. It didn't happen. And so this is an intrusion. For me, it's kind of a confusion. I don't, in my opinion, flags don't belong in sanctuaries, Christian or American. The Christian flag is also silly. It was made up by some YMCA guy in about 1905 when he was doing some morning devotion, and he made it up. And and it has, no surprise, kind of looks like the American flag, same colors, and he just made it up. We don't need a Christian flag. We've got the cross. A little better, and we don't need to pledge to the Christian flag. We've got the creed. We're doing fine. Now, does this mean then that Christians should be anti-patriotism? No. I'll stand up at Busch Stadium and I'll sing the Star Spangled Banner. I like the 4th of July. I'm proud to be an American. I am grateful for the country God has given me. But there's a difference between where they belong and where they fit. So I'll do my patriotism thing where it belongs, and I'll honor God where it belongs. So what about politics in the church? Well, I've already said, yeah, they belong here. So what about, how do we honor God in church? And what about our country? Well, on the 4th of July, we should be praying for our nation, praying for it to be just. We should be praying for our leaders, Paul says, all the time. So we should be praying for our leaders by name. We're praying for our government, our local leaders, our president. We should be praying for them. Can we thank our veterans in our church service? Of course. We can even pray for them on Veterans Day and thank God for the veterans He's provided who have cared for us, and thank our people by name, have them stand up and recognize them and pray for them. That's all appropriate. But you see, singing the Star Spangled Banner in church, no, not appropriate. Singing the Pledge of Allegiance in church, that doesn't really belong either. It's just not what we do here. It's not what we're here for. You get the distinction and how I'm kind of sorting this out? I'm not being arbitrary. There's a reason for everything I'm suggesting here, and there's a consistency in it if you think it through.
And getting back to this prayer in school, it opens up such a massive can of worms, because you could go down this rabbit hole with a lot of things like who's leading the prayer?
Right.
And if you have an atheist teacher, are they making a mockery of the
Right.
whole thing?
No, I agree. It just has no business.
Or is it you pray and fill in the blank of the name of your God?
I know, I agree. Well, see, this gets back to the whole problem of this Enlightenment project, because public schools are public schools. What's the foundation for them? Again, it's not God, it's the Enlightenment project, which is the amplification of individual righteousness, which is exactly what our kids are being taught in public schools. You're what matters. You decide what's true. How do you feel about who you really are? And it's all about exploring themselves. And they're told to figure out what they think is true. They're not told, here's the divine law, follow that. That's the last thing they're taught. So you have to realize the public schools are forming your children into being different people than you want them to be. Just the way it is.
But you're arguing about the wrong side of prayer in school. I mean, I don't want schools to drive prayer in school, but I don't want the government to restrict prayer in school.
Well,
Hold hands around a flagpole and pray.
of course they can. And they can.
That's what the argument is in today's world, is no, you can't.
No one's saying they can't do that. They're freely allowed to do that. No, they're not. No, they're not. They're not being forbidden from doing that. They maybe aren't getting money to pay for it, but they're not being forbidden from doing it.
Football coach down in Texas because his players kneel and pray before the game.
Well, we have to get into the nuances of it, and the point is that It's what's being endorsed and what's going on, that's part of the issue, and I agree with that. And I don't want God pushed out, but I also have to be careful here, guys. We're not trying to force the culture to be right. We're just trying to be a voice for God's truth in the culture. And when the culture is trying to shove God out, none of us should be surprised by this. None of us. And the battle we should be fighting is not for our rights to be upheld or our right to pray where we want to pray. This is the wrong thing for the church to be doing. We look petty when we do that. No, I agree, and that's from the government side. But again, that's the government's business. As a Christian, I could care less about that. All right. Yes, it is. All right, excellent. And so a Christian school, should we do this kind of thing? And this gets into the idea of what's sometimes called the Benedict Option, which has been suggested by a guy named Rod Dreher. Now my pen's not working. See if I can get it to kick in again. So the Benedict Option, a guy named Rod Dreher, which is D-R-E-H-E-R, he's been suggesting this for a while. The Benedict Option is that the culture has become so decadent, so far down this Enlightenment path, that it's time for the church to recognize there's a division and we need to pull back from the culture. I tend to be really sympathetic to this. I think he's on the right track. And I think, see, for 200 years, 1776 forward, the church and America kind of walked side by side. Most Americans were Christian. We were fine. But as the American way of life has grown increasingly about the individual, it's harder and harder for Christians to keep these things together. In the 20th century, we could still kind of hold them together, but in the 50s, it started to kind of branch apart. The 60s, it got pushed further, and now we're just watching this happen. Some Christians are still trying to figure out, how do we hold them back together? Or how do we keep them together? Others, like Dreher and the Benedict Option, are saying, it's time. We just need to realize it's done, and we've got to start being who we are and quit trying to be good Americans and good Christians. I agree. I am strongly of the opinion that to be a good Christian makes you a bad American, and to be a good American makes you a bad Christian. I believe this. And I know this bothers a lot of you, and you disagree with me. Fine. Disagree with me. Hold on to it as long as you can, but you're not going to be able to do it. Because if you're going to actually follow Christ, you're not going to be able to do it the way America wants you to do it. Because in America, everyone gets to decide for himself what's true, and we have to support everybody in his own individual rights. That's how it works in America. Always has, always will. And Christians don't operate that way. For us, Jesus is Lord, not me. And there's a big difference here, guys. And so the Benedict Option to me is appealing, but the downside is, as you point out, when does it start becoming abandoning the culture? That's the problem. We don't build the compound walls and invite everybody in and just, cut ourselves off and get off the grid. Buy land in Wyoming, pretty attractive idea, but that's not what we're called to do. We're called to be in the world and be engaging the world, active in the world, caring about it. But at the same time, being careful to nurture who we are. This puts us in this tension again. And so, to me, a Christian school is a brilliantly right thing to do, because I don't want to have my kids being enculturated and formed into thinking like an American. I want them thinking like a Christian. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to cultivate this. Now, you can say, well, you can't abandon the public schools. What do you mean? I'm going to try to change them by being there. You can make maybe a difference in that one little place, but you also have to realize there's a huge influence the other direction. And my opinion is that I don't think a 12-year-old or even a 14-year-old is up for the challenge, frankly. And for them to be out there trying to change all their friends and make them Christian, seriously? Who's influencing who here? And we need to be a little bit more sober about this and a little realistic. And this even goes down to, you say, well, pre-K is safe. No, it's not. From the earliest time in the public schools, what are the kids being taught? What do you feel? What do you want? Who are you? You explore yourself. It's all about the individual. And that's not how Christians operate. So I don't think a Christian school is abandoning the world at all. In fact, my argument would be we should be trying to cultivate our children and our homes and our families to be places of refuge, places of security, places of formation, where Christian people are being formed to be Christians. Our churches should be this. Formed to think like Christians, act like Christians, serve like Christians, and then equip them and prepare them to engage the world. Shelter them for as long as you can. I know that sounds weird, but I'm a big fan of sheltering kids. Absolutely. Shelter them as long as you can, because the time is going to come when they're going to engage the world. And if you have prepared them for that, they're going to be ready for it. So you teach your kid to swim in the shallow end before you throw them in the deep end. And it takes a long time to get a kid ready to engage the world. But when they hit 20 years old, or maybe 18, or maybe 25, you as the parent will know they're ready to go out there and embrace the world. And nothing's going to shock them, and they're up for it. And we as the church need to be preparing our kids for this. And the fact that we have so many kids who go off to college and come home not caring anymore means that we have failed. It's not the culture that's ruined them. The culture is the culture. We have failed by not getting them ready for it. And if we get them ready for it, they engage that culture and they come back stronger than ever. Then we've done our job. And if we do that by having Christian schools, amen. I'm all for it. Homeschooling too. All over it. You bet. All right. Anything else? Correct.
I have a different thing, and this goes back to your chart.
Yes.
You talk about the right hand, right, being about forgiveness of sins.
Yes.
But can you clarify how obviously Christ has said, and you talk about this a lot, you know, like, if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Yes.
How do we aren't about cheap grace. We aren't about, here is the gospel. You know, we've already clarified that.
Right.
That's not what we're about. So how do we, in our churches and things like that, how do we talk about the full word of God, right?
Yeah.
So I just like, I can get the sense that, yeah, we deliver the gospel, but there's both going on.
Oh man, you bet there is. I've got another book about that. Now, it sounds a little bit like contrived and like you're my shill, but actually, my first book was called A Case for Character, and this is exactly what I'm after. That we can't reduce the church to merely just being the gospel place. We are here to preach God's whole counsel and to form people in the Christian faith, and that's the work of the law, that's ethics. And the church should be very interested in this, especially when the left hand is dropping the ball as egregiously as it is. We need to pick it up, and the church should be doing this. So, yeah, I'm totally with you. So take a look at my other book, and you'll like it. It's exactly what I'm arguing, and I'm making the case for that from a Lutheran standpoint. Yeah, exactly. Well said. Yes. That's fine. Go ahead. We got 3 minutes.
Used to be that churches or Christian organizations were doing, establishing hospitals.
Yes.
Social welfare. Our government's doing that now.
Yeah.
Churches pretty much, I see it, the churches kind of advocated that and were called to take care of those things.
That's a great point. Question about hospitals and social welfare. Should the church be doing this? The church used to do a lot of this. I think the church got out of that because we can argue about this because it wasn't cost effective and it doesn't make money. Well, yeah, it doesn't. It's not cost effective. Helping people doesn't make money for you. It's something you're doing because it's the right thing to do. The government has got into that a lot, and we can argue about whether the government's good at that or not. Probably not very good, but that's kind of the way it is. Sorting out whether the government should do that or the church should do that is one of those things I think is a worthwhile discussion. But the church should probably be a little less eager to abdicate itself from these things. And we have done that. We've pulled back from that stuff so much, and I think that's a wrong move. The church probably needs to be thinking about more how we engage the culture in productive ways, not just because we want to make a good name for ourselves, but we do want to witness God's love, but we do want to show that we care about that world.
And we as individuals are called to care for our members. Go down the,
The what?
Medicaid, those are things that, we choose to have the government take care of their.
Yeah, no, you're right. The interface between who should be caring for our ill, Medicaid, Medicare kind of stuff, and what the church should be doing, these are things that are worth talking about and thinking about and not just kind of seeding the ground. And our own family members, agreed. So are we caring for them, or are we just letting the government step in and take care of it for us? I agree. All right, we are out of time. Pastor Schultz.
Just kind of last word. I think just to kind of recap what you were saying, right? So often Christians want to live with that separation of church and state. And I want to be an American citizen and protect the land and all that, and I want to be a Christian. And I think what you're saying is, no, there's not a separation between the two realms. It's together.
Right.
We live in tension between that left-hand realm
Right.
and the right-hand realm, and all of our decision-making, how we vote, what we stand for, what we want, what we desire, it is all about being a Christian in the world.
Correct.
And all
Right. It's about,
It goes to what we talked about last night.
Correct.
Being a Christian knight is to deny yourself.
Yep.
And that's really, we're looking for godly things to happen in
Yes.
the world, even though the world is often not godly.
exactly. All right. Thank you for your attention. Let's close with a word of prayer. Lord, I am grateful that you've put us into this country and given us so many privileges and advantages as American people. Help us to live wisely as Christian people and making that our dominant definition of who we are, and engage the culture around us in ways that are pleasing to you. Give us wisdom, give us the ability to discern the path forward so that we are able to live as your people faithfully and make an impact around the world the way you want us to do it. Pray that you guide us now in our separate ways, keep us in your care as we go forward into your world to enjoy the gifts you give to us. We pray it in Christ. Amen. Blessings on your day. We'll see you tomorrow morning.